Welcome back to another video. Today is the start of a new potential series. We're going to see what happens if I enjoy it. If I don't, we're just going to see what kind of happens. But today we're going to be talking about older video game titles. I'm going to call this throwback gaming, I guess. Throwback gaming, I don't know. It might be like a weekly thing I do where I upload and I talk about, old video games, stuff like that, and take a look back if they are as good as we remember them, or if it's kind of the nostalgia goggles covering, what we remember, or I guess kind of the blemishes of it, if you will. So yeah, let's get into today's game. And that will be Breath of the Wild, one of the biggest games ever made, one of the most hyped games ever made, and one of the best games ever made. Maybe. I don't know about that. So, Breath of the Wild is kind of an interesting Zelda game. Basically, they completely erased everything from Zelda that you kind of know. You got Link, Zelda, a few characters from other games who are kind of hinted at and do show up. And it's not really connected to any other Zelda game. As far as I'm aware, the timeline for Zelda is really convoluted and really confusing. There's multiple timelines, what ifs, stuff like that. But basically, I believe this game in particular takes place it's the last game in the whole timeline. So all the Zelda games all the Zelda timelines merge, and they eventually become this, no matter what timeline it is. If it's good, bad, indifferent, whatever it is. If you want to know more about that, look it up online. I'm not a huge experienced person, but this game in the story, basically, it is the last game in the timeline. So all the other Zelda games happen before it in different orders, stuff like that. But this is the final. So this is like the end, at least of right now, of the Zelda timeline, which is pretty cool if you think about it. So like I mentioned before, this is one of the biggest Zelda games out there. As you can see by the map, it is a huge open world. There is hundreds of things to do, hundreds of places to go, and there's a lot to do in the game. Now, a lot of times when you hear this game being mentioned, when you hear, not this game being mentioned, but when you hear other games, a lot of people like to call it, oh, it's A, B, C, or D, but with Breath of the Wild, and it's like, I'm sorry, what? It's what? I just, it's kind of a compliment to this game, that people would say, oh, it's Breath of the Wild, but with, I don't know, guns, or with ancient Japan, or whatever the case may be. People like to always compare that whatever that game is Breath of the Wild. Like, I saw one particular post, I can't remember where, but they were like, oh, well, Horizon Forbidden West, a huge game right now, or kind of huge game, not really anymore, but at the time it was a huge game. Oh, that's Breath of the Wild, but with robots. And I'm like, that's not really the case. There's a lot different between the two, but okay. And like I said, I think that's a fair kind of, or it's a, not fair, but it's a nice compliment to the game. Absolutely. If people are comparing other AAA games to yours, definitely think that's a compliment. But at the same time, I do think this game gets a lot more credit than it deserves, and it is a little bit overrated. Now, the game being overrated does not make it a bad game. I think a lot of people, when they hear overrated, they're like, oh, well, that means it's a bad game. No, absolutely not. This game is great. All right, it is a phenomenal game, and it really does show how powerful the Nintendo Switch can be. And I think that overall, it does a really good job, and it's a great launch title for this game, and it works very well. I think it's great, and I cannot wait to see what they do with the sequel, because yes, this game does have a sequel being made, and I'm pretty excited for it, and I hope that it is pretty good. I hope it is better than what they did with this game. So, I do think that it is overall typically an overrated game. One particular issue that I have, even to this day, is kind of the combat seems to be a little sloppy, I guess. I think with a little bit of extra care and effort put into it, it could end up being a really good game in combat-wise. The gameplay and the combat's not bad. I mean, as you can see here, I'm doing fairly well with all these moblins or whatever they're called. I'm doing fairly well with them. It just, there's been particular times where I'm just like, okay, well, that's a little rough, and it has to take some getting used to, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. But overall, I mean, it's not bad. definitely playable, and there's definitely way worse games out there. I just think that the game could use a little bit of work on the combat side of things. Now, who knows? Maybe you think the combat's fine, and if you do, then awesome. You know, if you like the combat a lot, then sweet. It definitely feels like Legend of Zelda, Zelda-y, if you know what I mean. You know, if you've ever played a Zelda game, you know what I'm talking about in terms of the gameplay. It definitely feels like Zelda, but way more variety and space. And like I said, that's not really a bad thing because the Zelda games have had really good gameplay and combat overall through the whole series pretty much. However, the biggest change from other Zelda games is obviously the fact that it is an open world game. All the other Zelda games, or the ones that I can think of, like the 3D ones, Wind Waker, Ocarina of Time, Twilight Princess, you basically had the ability to go and explore the worlds somewhat. Like Ocarina of Time, you can go to the village, the opening village. It's been so long since I played that game, I don't remember. You can go to the village, you can go to Hyrule Castle, you can go to anywhere, the field, the little farm where you get the Epona. You can do all that stuff, which is really cool. But this is full on open world. So as you can see, you've got your runes, which are basically these abilities that you get later on throughout the game. Your map right here, which has all these shrines, which are, I don't think they're necessary to beat the game. I think they are necessary to get the Master Sword. I could be wrong about that. Don't quote me. Album, these are basically your pictures. I don't know if you actually take these or if they're taken automatically. I think these are ones that you take. You've got a basically where it has any monsters or anything that you run into. It has that on here. Pretty cool stuff. Like I said, there's a lot of exploration to do in the game. So yeah, there's stealth in the game where you can crouch behind enemies and basically stealth up on them, which is really cool. But yeah, so like I said, with the old Zelda games, you can explore those to a certain extent, but with this game, it is massively open world. There's adventure logs, there's shrine quests, there's a bunch of main quests. Because I have beaten the game already, there's not much more I can do. So the only mission I can do is the Destroy Ganon, but I do have these side missions that I can do, which there are loads of them. I thought I beat all the side missions, but I guess not. And then you've got memories, which are basically story memories that you get throughout the game and whatnot. So you have a bunch of stuff that you can do in the game and basically play it however you want. I think that's a really cool thing about the game. So when you start the game and everything, obviously you kind of have your tutorial area, but the game pretty much throws you in and doesn't really give you a whole lot of guidance, which I think is a good thing and a bad thing. I personally do like the idea of going around and just, if you see something in the distance you want to go get, like, oh, there's that tower all the way out there, let me go get it. You can go get it freely, and I think that that's really cool. You are kind of held back by some limitations in certain areas of the game, like the desert, the volcano, the mountain, the snow mountain, stuff like that. You have a certain limit. So if you look at the bottom corner, you can actually see that there's a temperature gauge. So right there, you can see it's got the Fahrenheit symbol. You've got how cold you are versus hot. If you go into certain areas, that little meter will dip in between. The reason why it is currently the cold is much lower than the hot is because of the particular armor set that I'm wearing. So in the game, there's a huge temperature gauge where if you're in some place too cold, you start taking damage, you start to die. Same with if you're too hot, you start overheating, you then will die as well. And I think that really adds to it, honestly. Above the Fahrenheit thing, you've got your kind of radar. If you're close to a shrine, it'll detect, and this is kind of how you find all the shrines. And then below that, you've got your sound sensor. So this is, stealth. This is not stealth. You're pretty loud. And then the time, and then the weather of the world. It's a little cloudy in the world right now, and you can clearly see that. But if it's raining or anything like that, obviously that'll show up instead. Now, in terms of the story, I'm not really going to go into the story too much. But it's your typical Zelda story. You wake up and you have no memory and you're trying to figure out what's going on, and you then have to go and find Zelda and save Zelda from the Ganon, which is in that big old Hyrule Castle, of course. And you have to get these 4 divine beasts. So you got, like, what is that, a dragon? Or that's a chameleon. You have a camel, a bird, and an elephant. You basically have to go and do these particular challenges and do these certain dungeons, if you will. and basically you eventually unlock the abilities to use them, and they range and vary. I don't particularly remember what the abilities are. I know one of them is if you deflect and they hit you, you actually can like kind of block it, and it doesn't react. So that's pretty cool. But in terms of story, it's your typical Zelda story, which is a good and bad thing. I mean, I did think that the story was pretty enjoyable. You know, I thought that it definitely had a great opening. You have no idea what's going on. You're kind of thrown into it, and you kind of just have to go with the flow, and I think it's really cool. Characters you come across are really cool. It's just your typical Legend of Zelda story. Nothing special there. You basically just have to, you're Link, and you have to try to find Zelda. And I mean, that's pretty much it. And, you know, like I said, if there's the saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Then, I mean, hey, it's not broken. The storylines still, you know, are good, and they still went with it. So that, you know, hey, props to them. So I forgot to show this off when I was talking about it, but with the weather and stuff, so you can see in the middle, kind of, there's my Fahrenheit bar. So if I actually unequip this armor and equip like this, and I don't know, trousers like that, you can see it goes back up. If I equip things like this particular desert armor set, my heat goes down. Don't worry. And then if I do like this, if I wear like this particular set of armor, I'm actually completely like immune to the heat. You've got just a bunch of different armor varieties and stuff like that, and it's kind of up to whatever you want to wear. A lot of these kind of help you, like this helps you swim in the world. This one doesn't really do anything, I don't think. It's just kind of an Easter egg, I think. This one is also kind of an Easter egg to the original Zelda look, and you can actually dye this armor whatever you want. So if you want it to be green, black, blue, whatever, you can do that, which I think is really cool and a nice little nod. As well as that, you also have, you can carry up to 4 shields, you can carry a bunch of bow and arrows, have some of them equipped, a bunch of arrows, a bunch of swords, going from big old axes to short swords to long swords to big old heavy blades. Whatever you want to do, you can use, and I think that's a really cool part about the game. So I can use this great flame if I want to, or this great blade, or I can use just a typical guardian sword, which is kind of the technology that they use in the game and that the enemies use, and I think that's really cool. And it's definitely stuff, like a lot of stuff you're going to be starting out with are pretty weak, but then later on through the game you get some pretty strong stuff. So one thing that is not meant to last in the game are your weapons. There's a few that I believe do last forever, or somewhat, in a way. One of them is the Master Sword. It will last forever, but it does run out of energy. So it recharges the energy, but you get to keep it. All these other swords, as you can see right here, the Great Flame is badly damaged. That means it's either about to break or it's basically useless. Like I said, I think maybe not the armor, but all the weapons and stuff, they definitely have a certain limit, and then they kind of stop working. With my bows, as you can see here, I've got a falcon bow, royal bows, great eagle bow, badly damaged, which is fine. I mean, you know, throughout the world and throughout the game, you're going to be constantly picking up and dropping weapons, and there's really nothing you can really do about it. You know, that's just kind of how the flow of the game is. You know, you go through a sword, you drop it, you go pick up another one nearby. It's never impossible to get yourself a nice sword, and that's kind of what I like. You know, it's like you know, broke, oh well, okay, throw it aside, oh, give me a new one, and you just keep on going, which I think is really cool. So that was Breath of the Wild. It was kind of fun to do some more gameplay stuff. I've been playing the game for probably about 30 minutes now, going back to it. But I've only been talking about the game for, what is that, like 13-ish minutes. So I've been playing about half of it off screen. And I gotta say, the game is definitely fun, and it's really nice to go back to it. I like to do this occasionally where I just go back to it, but I decided, why not make a series about it where I go back and give the pros and the cons and kind of a critique of the game, and go back to it. You know, recently on my channel I've been doing that. I went back and looked at Slender Man. I went back and looked at my Xbox 360 in 2022. And to me, it's just really cool to go back to some of these games that you're like, I love that game as a kid, but was it as good as I remember it, or was that just me with the nostalgia thinking back going, oh yeah, that game's really good. And this is definitely one of those. I think definitely a lot of it is nostalgia, and honestly, a lot of it is just kind of overhyped. Or not overhyped, but overrated. There we go. That's the word I'm thinking of. I can't really talk today. So yeah, if it's a little rough around the edges, I apologize for that. I'm not really like a huge video game reviewer. I don't think ever reviewed a game. I can look at a game and go, okay, that's a good game. Oh, that's a bad game. But I don't know like the in-depths and all that stuff. From what I remember and from what I've been playing, it is overall a pretty solid game, a really good Switch game. And if you have a Switch and you don't own this, what are you doing? This is a must-have, okay? I mean, if you seriously don't own a Switch, or you own a Switch and you don't have this, what are you doing? Go out and buy this and play this right now. You'll love it. But yeah, so maybe I'll continue doing this franchise, or not franchise, but series. Who knows? You know, I might go and look at a pretty game that was, or not a pretty game, but a game that was pretty underwhelming, or look at a game that was, you know, pretty overrated. Who knows? I might, you know, do this with whatever game. But yeah, so if you guys enjoyed, leave a like. I do appreciate it, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace out.